Hello and welcome to another episode of Mondays with Mundy, because that's me, Jim Mundy, the historian for the Union League Legacy Foundation at the Union League of Philadelphia on South Broad Street. So we spent the last 2 weeks talking about the dates of April 14th and 15th of 1865, because those are the dates on which Abraham Lincoln was shot and on which he died. This week, we're still talking about April the 14th and 15th, but for a different reason, and in a different year. The year was 1912, because those are the dates when the Royal Mail ship Titanic hit the iceberg late at night on the 14th and sank early in the morning on the 15th. And so that's our story this week. And of course, as you can imagine, there are connections between the Titanic, Philadelphia, and the Union League itself. So here's our story. And it starts with a young gentleman named Clement A. Griscom. Born in Philadelphia, an old Quaker Philadelphia family, graduated Central High School in 1857 and went to work for an old Quaker shipping company called Peter White and Company. He became a shipping agent. And apparently Griscom was a really smart young kid, because in just 6 years, at the age of 22 in 1863, he was made a partner in the firm. 3 years after that, in 1866, he would join the Union League of Philadelphia. All right, he's on the upward spiral. Now, at the League, Griscom had the chance to meet many of Philadelphia's greatest industrialists, financiers, and railroad executives, which included John Edgar Thompson, then the president of the Pennsylvania Railroad, which would eventually become the world's largest railroad and probably the most powerful one. So Thompson was a man who knew how to make money. And in 1871, he and Griscom created a company called the International Navigation Company. And its ships would carry two commodities. Number one was mail, because that was a very lucrative commodity to carry back and forth. And then the second one, of course, was passengers, because this was a period of immigration. And these immigrants had to get from the west of Europe to America, specifically Philadelphia, and they would take INC steamships. And because when they got to Philadelphia, they would then buy tickets on the Pennsylvania Railroad, and the railroad would take them further inland, all right, fueling that immigration. So INC is off to a running start, and it was financed by something called the Fidelity Insurance Trust and Safe Deposit Company that was organized in 1866 by a League member named Clarence Clark, whose family bank helped literally bankroll the American Civil War. And so Clarence Clark was a wealthy Philadelphian, and he was joined by two other League members in 1866, Peter A.B. Widener and Thomas Drake. And they will come back into the story a little later on. Okay, so it's 1871, the INC is up and running. They become an incredibly successful steamship company in many, many different ways. And over the course of the 19th century, Griscom will become known as the senior figure in the American shipping industry. And he was that good and that well respected. So by the early 1890s, the competition on the Atlantic is fierce. And Griscom realizes that if INC is going to survive, then it needs to find a way of consolidating its businesses and to reduce expenses and hopefully improve profits. And in 1899, Griscom would meet probably the most famous financier in American history, John Pierpont Morgan. All right. Now, Morgan was the genius at mergers and acquisitions. All right. And there was nobody better at it. All right. At this point, he was in the groundswell of Standard Oil with Johnny Rockefeller and Peter A.B. Widener. And in the early 20th century, he was forming U.S. Steel Corporation and the American Tobacco Company. All right. So an incredibly wealthy man who knew how to take money and use it wisely, shall we say. And so he and Griscom devised a scheme where they would take the INC, which in 1893, Griscom had changed from the International Navigation Company, based in Philadelphia, to the International Navigation Corporation, based in New Jersey, so it could compete better with the New York firms. And they took the INC and they began to acquire up to 5 different steamship companies, including the White Star Line, which would be very important because it was the White Star Line that commissioned the Titanic. And all right, so Widener, Peter A.B. Widener, got to know J.P. Morgan. They were business partners. They were friends. And so it shouldn't be surprising that the IMM, International Mercantile Marine, right, the successor, the holding company for all these different steamship companies that were being purchased by the INC, that Widener was a 20% partner, one of the voting partners, 5 voting partners in IMM. So he basically owned, if you will, a fifth of the Titanic. All right, so let's get back to the Titanic. All right. Uh, at this point, White Star Line is, the chairman is J. Bruce Ismay, the son of Thomas Ismay, who founded it in 1845. And Ismay has to compete against the Cunard Line, which at this point has the two most luxurious steamships on the ocean, the Mauretania and the Lusitania. And Ismay is going to commission 3 ships, or the White Star Line will commission 3 ships. That's it, the Oceanic, Titanic, and Britannic. The Titanic, the keel was laid in 1909. Its sea trials, it was launched in 1911, and the sea trials took place in early April of 1912 because its maiden voyage was set for April the 12th from Queenstown Harbor, now today known as Cove, or south of Cork on the south coast of Ireland, to New York City. Now, as you can imagine, and this was built as the most luxurious ship on the water, and therefore it attracted a lot of attention and a lot of wealthy people, including a number of League members. So let's go to them. Start with the Widener family. So Peter A.B. Widener's son, George, and his grandson, Harry, and George's wife, Eleanor Elkins, were on the ship. All right, now, they were in Paris looking for a French chef for their new hotel, the Ritz-Carlton, at Broad and Walnut Streets, opposite the old Bellevue Stratford Hotel. Their son, Harry, who came with them, who was a recent graduate from Harvard. Harry graduated from Harvard in 1907 and joined the League in 1909. His father had joined the League in 1887, and his father, again, as we knew, in 1866, his grandfather. So you have the 3 Wideners. All right, Harry picked up the boat in Southampton, which then went to Cherbourg. Okay, also on the boat in Cherbourg, we would find the John Borland Thayer family. John B. Thayer came from an old Philadelphia family, well off, as you can imagine. John B. Thayer graduated from the University of Pennsylvania in 1881. He was known as one of the best cricket players in America and baseball. He captained the University of Pennsylvania baseball team in 1897. When he graduated, in 1879, and when he graduated from Penn in 1881, he went to work for the Pennsylvania Railroad. And the way the Pennsylvania Railroad hierarchy worked is that there was a president, then a first vice president, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. And at the time of our story, John Borland Thayer was the second vice president of the Pennsylvania Railroad, and he was destined to become the president, right? So, John B. Thayer's wife was on board, as well as his son, young Jack B. Thayer III. All right. Now, they had been in Germany as guests of the American honorary consul. They were on their way back to Philadelphia at the end of their trip. And then there was another League member on board named Frederick Sutton. And Frederick Sutton was an immigrant from England, Suffolk in East Anglia. In 1850, became basically a coffee merchant on Front Street and along the wharves, but also became a banker and a real estate developer, and was better well known as the developer of the New Jersey shoreline, specifically a place called 5 Mile Beach, which today we know as Wildwood, right? Halfway between Atlantic City and Cape May, about that, all right? So they are on the ship as well, and there is another League family, and their name is Martinez Cardatha, all right? So Thomas Drake, right? One of the founding partners of the Fidelity Trust Company, as it was now known. Another Englishman went to Philadelphia, right? Made his money in textiles during the Civil War, as we heard. Thomas Drake's daughter, Charlotte, married James Warburton Martinez Cardoza. All right. Now, James Warburton was the grandson of Count Juan Martinez Cardoza, who came to Philadelphia from Spain in the mid-19th century. Very wealthy man. And you added the two fortunes. Again, money marries money, much like the Elkinses and the Wideners and things like that. And so Thomas Drake's only daughter, only child, Charlotte, was raised in Germantown, Pennsylvania, the Germantown neighborhood in Philadelphia, and an animal lover, and actually a big game hunter. And so she and her son, by James, a son named Thomas Drake, Martinez Cardoza, were coming back from a safari in Africa and from having visited Thomas's hunting lodge in Hungary. So they're now going to join the ship, we believe, in Cherbourg as well. All right. So what happens next? All right. So the Titanic, Southampton, Cherbourg, Queenstown, April the 12th, on its maiden voyage across the ocean. The captain of the Titanic was named Edward Smith. He was the senior and ranking captain in the White Star Line, considered its most competent and seaworthy captain. He was actually taken from the Oceanic and put on the Titanic just for this inaugural voyage. And he planned to retire at the end of this voyage. It was going to be his last voyage, either way, if you will. So everything is going fine. This is the North Atlantic. We're talking off the southeast coast of Newfoundland, about 400 miles. Iceberg territory, right? Foggy. And that night, the Wideners hosted a very elegant but small private dinner for Captain Smith. And the dinner included the Thayers and John Jacob Astor IV and his wife. So you can see there was a lot of wealth and money aboard the Titanic this time. So Smith would leave the dinner at about 9 o'clock just to check on things, and the dinner itself would dissipate, and everybody went back to their cabins. And it was at 11:40 p.m. that everybody felt the slight bump, if you will, and that was actually the Titanic hitting the iceberg. Now, the iceberg buckled the sides, that is the hull of the Titanic, along its seams where it was riveted. And as these seams burst, water came in. These were, in theory, watertight compartments because the Titanic was supposed to be unsinkable, but it was. And it was clear to everybody that the ship was going to sink because it began to take on water incredibly fast, and the ship was going down by the bow. And the alarm was raised because both young Harry Widener, now his father George had joined the League in 1887. Harry had joined in 1909, so they're both League members, right? Harry goes up on deck at the same time that the Thayers, right now, John B. Thayer had joined in the early 1890s, and his son Jack did not join the League, all right? But young Jack went up on top, and they came back to their parents with the message that it's time to get up and put on life jackets and get in the lifeboats because the Titanic was sinking. Now, it was women and children in the boats, and that was the protocol that was followed by both the Wideners and the Thayers, and by Frederick Sutton. Mrs. Eleanor Elkins Widener and her maid would go in lifeboat 3, and they would be joined by Mrs. Thayer herself. So they were off, and they were eventually picked up by the Cunard liner Carpathia. And that left behind both George, Harry, John B., the Wideners, and the Thayers. 3 would go down with the ship. That is, both of the Wideners and John B. Thayer, the father. Young Jack Thayer would, at the last minute, jump overboard into that freezing Atlantic Ocean and would eventually find lifeboat number 12, which had capsized, and he would cling to the top of the hull of that lifeboat. It would eventually picked up, I think, by the Carpathia itself as well. Frederick Sutton went down with the Titanic, and his body, one of the first to be recovered by the cable ship, the Bennett Mackay, was identified, but then buried at sea. The other 3 bodies, if they were found, were never identified at all. And that leaves the Martinez Cardazes. Now, they occupied one of the 2 most expensive suites or staterooms on the Titanic itself, B51, 53, and 55. It included 2 bedrooms, a sitting room, and a private 50-foot balcony or promenade. So clearly, they had the money to spend. Now it would turn out that both Charlotte and her son Thomas and their servants, they each had 1, all 4 would end up in lifeboat 14, and they would survive and be picked up by another steamship later on, and they would make it back to Philadelphia. So how do we end the tale? Well, let's rewind a little bit. So the Union League, Philadelphia, Peter A.B. Widener. So the Titanic, at the time it went down, was owned by the International Mercantile Marine Corporation, and one of its 5 voting partners was Peter A.B. Widener, who ironically and tragically lost his son and grandson on the ship. Okay, John Borland Thayer went down, all right, and the Cardazes and young Jack Thayer would survive, right? Young Jack Thayer would eventually work for the University of Pennsylvania, but would commit suicide in 1945. He just never really recovered from that tragic occurrence on the Atlantic Ocean. Young Thomas Drake Martinez Cardoza was basically a gentleman. I don't think he really worked, but he inherited a lot of money because some of which came from the settlement his mother made against the White Star Line. Actually, she had one of the largest settlements against the White Star Line, against the insurance company, which at this point is another Philadelphia company that we know of, the Fidelity Trust Company. And in 1912, her insurance claim was for $177,000. In 2018, 2019 dollars, that would be close to $5 million instead. So young Thomas was well off, as we say. Young Thomas would live until June of 1952 when he died at his home in Germantown. And with that, we end our story of the Titanic, Philadelphia, and the Union League. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something new. Who would have thought? Titanic, Philadelphia, Union League. But there you are. So join us next week if you will. But in the meantime, stay well and stay healthy and have a good week. Thank you and goodbye.